All right, how's it going, everyone? Thanks for joining me on a new episode of the Music of Your Pod. My name is Josh, and if it's your first time tuning in, welcome. This is just a podcast where we talk about music, and this is going to be episode 72 of the album review series. So, this is going to be an album review. If you clicked on the title, you probably already know, but it's going to be over the latest Lizzo album, titled Special. This album was released here on July 15th, so hopefully when this episode drops, it'll be at about a month out. If you're a returning listener, welcome back as well. It's been about, since like end of June, since we put out another episode. That episode being a Talking Tracks episode 9. Thanks for everyone that listened to that. Also, on that back end of that episode, we did Best and Worst Track of the Week of February, which this year so far, in terms of like Hot 100 and Best and Worst Track of the Week, it's been a sort of an interesting year. Not many big things other than like the Kate Bush phenomenon with Stranger Things happening. Not to go off on a tangent, but we'll be having Talking Tracks, another episode of Talking Tracks soon after this review. Along with Best and Worst Track of the Week for March 2022, which should line up. Hopefully I'll get Best and Worst Track of the Week of April quite soon, and then as summer is finishing up, we can kind of start talking about summer in retrospect. So that's going to be cool coming up. But for now, let's go ahead and just focus on this Lizzo album review. She kind of doesn't need much introduction. She is an American singer-songwriter, rapper, and also flutist. I believe that's the technical term for someone that plays flute. They kind of blew up, if you were alive, around 2018, 2019, with some breakout hits, which those hits weren't necessarily released on the album that she dropped in 2019, 'Cause I Love You. It's kind of a weird phenomenon, those hits being Truth Hurts and also Good as Hell. But Lizzo, essentially multi-talented artist, born in Detroit, later moved to Houston, where she got her start performing as a musician. I'm sure the hip-hop background probably sparked around Houston. And then eventually she moved back to Minneapolis, I believe. She released her first two albums, Lizzo Bangers in 2013 and Big Girl Small World in 2015, prior to signing to Atlantic Records. So I did not go back and listen to those albums because at this point they are quite old, and I don't think they'll have too much connection with these current releases. I could be wrong, but they early 2000s stuff. I'm guessing she was more of an independent artist, and then eventually she finally was able to make that major signing. This makes sense since Lizzo didn't really garner much success until about 2019, like I was saying earlier, when her debut album, 'Cause I Love You, came out, which is essentially around the time I was introduced to her. 'Cause I Loved You peaked in the top 5 of the Billboard 200, so it seems that the main driving factor of her success around 2019 actually was the virality of the hit song Truth Hurts, which was released in 2017. That made it on the deluxe version of 'Cause I Love You, so essentially a re-release with bonus tracks. A similar situation happened with the track Good as Hell, which was also a track that was initially released in 2016. Lizzo earned 3 Grammy Awards in 2020, one for Best Urban Contemporary Album, one for Best Pop Solo Performance with Truth Hurts, and then Best Traditional R&B Performance for the song Jerome. After this, Lizzo was a little quiet working on her next material, the song titled Rumors, that was released in 2020 featuring Cardi B. Released in 2021 featuring Cardi B, which has since been much forgotten by the general music community. She then released the lead single for her second album, Special, which we're covering today, an April title, at About Damn Time, which ended up being a #1 hit song on the Hot 100. Just to kind of go back and recap the whole Grammy thing. It's a bit interesting that she won Best Pop Solo Performance for Truth Hurts several years after it was released for the Academy Awards 3 years later in 2020. This is kind of a good example of maybe how the Grammys are typically won. Because if this track really was best pop solo performance, what happened in 2017 when the song was the same exact song and just as good? Um, just a thought, but hey, it's the Grammys. It's not that serious. And just to go over some thoughts over Because I Love You released in 2019, and just to give some inherent bias I have of Lizzo in general, I have not been avid, I have not been an advocate for Lizzo since I have first been introduced to them. However, I do recognize the talent. I do recognize the appeal as well. You can't knock what she's doing as well in terms of just her having a footprint in the overall pop landscape. Even though she's marketed as also a rapper, I'm going to get into that here in a second. Because I Love You, in my opinion, was not as strong was not a strong album as it was, I guess, critically received back in 2019. Just off the bat, the album kicks off with the self-titled track that features an anthemic chorus that highlights the powerful voice that Lizzo has. The track itself isn't all too exciting instrumentally, with a chirpy piano structuring the verses that features Lizzo's rapping. That, in my opinion, it's not necessarily great, but not bad. It's just essentially adequate. That's kind of just like a running theme with much of the rapping on this album. Another track, Like a Girl, was a bit more fun. I found it a little bit more entertaining than Cause I Love You, but it still seemed to follow this pattern of being overly anthemic, essentially a power pop track with some adequate rapping as well thrown in to give the track some needed attitude. It just felt a little bit forced. Juice had a much needed refreshing instrumental. Soulmate is the first true sounding hip hop track, in my opinion, on this album that later shifts to like this bouncy pop song. And it seems like it had a lot more potential than it was given, in the end result. Tempo was an outlier in the album, in my opinion, as it featured Missy Elliott and even sounded like it was just a straight up Missy Elliott track. It perhaps was the truest sounding hip hop track on this album. Exactly How I Feel featured one of the worst Gucci Mane performances and verses I've ever heard. I didn't know. He didn't even sound like Gucci Mane. It's very surprising hearing this in retrospect, and I'm wondering if Gucci Mane even remembers doing this verse. This album, in my opinion, was quite average, and if I'm being a little blunt, it wasn't very good either. I don't know what was going on in 2019. I don't think this album necessarily aged well. And I think that's evident in, if you go back and ask the average pop listener, what is your favorite Lizzo song from 2019? They're not going to name a track off of Cause I Love You, more than likely. They're going to tell you Truth Hurts, which, and to be fair, it is on the deluxe album, but Truth Hurts is not a song from 2019, and neither is Good as Hell. Moving forward with what I'm taking away with this new album here, Special, in 2022, well, I certainly do think it's an improvement. It's I won't say that the rapping got better, but in my opinion, the songs got better and they got stronger. They have a bit more direction overall, as opposed to Cause I Love You. Not to say this album here, Special, does not have problems, but I think Lizzo comes to form in a lot of the tracks here on this album, and there are certainly some highlights. Starting off with the track The Sign, I thought this was an interesting opener. It's nice, smooth, and it has a busy bass line all throughout that's quite nice. It kind of the track overall kind of reminds me of the production that's on Outkast's Bombs Over Baghdad. It's not bad. I dig the knocking and drive percussive textures on here that give the track a nice dancey flavor. And it's a nice adjustment to her overall pop style since the last album. I'll take this track over pretty much most tracks on Cause I Love You. And then after that, we follow up with a pretty solid track with About Damn Time. Here we have a more of a heavier funk-inspired pop track, some interesting grit on Lizzo's voice here. But there's something just slightly dull about the chorus section. It's slightly monotone. It doesn't fit with the charismatic performance on the rest of the track. For instance, the second verse that features perhaps the most catchy section of the whole entire album Doesn't really quite line up with much else of the track. And also the track also features more of like this disco-inspired sensibility with this melodic flute hook that shows up more prominently in the bridge. And it's slightly derivative of like what you'd expect like the most cliche disco-sounding track to be. After that, though, we get our first dip in the album, which was quite disappointing. And it kind of brought me back to the essence of what "Cause I Love You" was. And it was just like these novelty cliche tracks that ultimately are pretty forgettable. And I think they're just like candy stuffed in the album to make it a little bit sweeter, but it's a very cheap tactic. Here's where I don't understand the turn the album gets, as we had the album open up with two solid pop tracks. It goes from a nicely, we go from nicely constructed pop tracks to a track that like this that's nowhere near the quality of the first two tracks. Like I said earlier, it's novelty. It's cliche all over with the lyrical material on here. It tries to go for an overly angsty attitude on here that doesn't really feel all that threatening. Some cliche call and response bridge, ad libs, hold me down, hold me back, just stuff like that. It's quite brief. It feels cheap. Also, the one thing that really bothers me on here, this is a feature of the album that happens over and over again, not over and over again, but it happens several times. They sample old tracks that are quite recognizable. For instance, on this track, it's Beastie Boys Girls. That didn't need to happen. The sample wasn't used in any substantial way other than to provide a cheap hook in the beat. It's disappointing that this tactic is done again on this album later on. Yeah, this just isn't the only time Lizzo's done this. "Cause I Love You" might have had it as well. I can't remember. But also, Girls. Is this supposed to feature rapping? And if so, did it improve from the last album? I'm going to say no. But if this is Lizzo rapping, she's not that interesting of a rapper. This track is an example of that. But after that, the album does pick up a little bit. "To Be Loved" is a little bit of return to form from the first two tracks. It's a decently constructed pop track. There's a nice bridge section on here. The angst that's thrown in feels believable. It's not bad. After that, though, we get, maybe a little bit of a dip with "I Love You, Bitch." This is back to the novelty-esque performance that it just kind of bugs me with some of Lizzo's material. Some corny lyrical material thrown in, some, bad wordplay, uninspired instrumentals structured around a piano eighth note chord progression. I will say the track does brighten up as it develops, but it doesn't really save it all that much. It just feels a little bit more forced and calculated. After that, Special. This is a really interesting track in terms of like production. It sounds and feels very 2000s pop R&B a la Kanye West. And I think she sounded great on this sort of thing. And I think it's a direction that if Lizzo went with, her music would dramatically improve. And the track has a nice message. It's not bad. But unfortunately, after that, we get another dip with "Break Up Twice." This track opens up with over-reliance on a very popular guitar sample that has been used on several other hip-hop R&B tracks, but nowhere nearly as good. I think the official sample is from "Private Number" by Judy Clay and William Bell. And then she goes off to rip off Lauryn Hill's "Doo Wop That Thing," which features an iconic chorus in like the overall R&B discography of like the 2000s, 90s. I'm not sure what decade it belongs to. But Lizzo's integration of this doesn't deliver any payoff that the original had. Again, the track features cheesy lyrical material, putting up with Gemini shit, horoscope, a referencing that happens again on the album later. The chorus feels so stale for taking from such an iconic track. It's a little disappointing. After that, though, we do get an improvement with probably one of the better tracks on this album overall, with Everybody's Gay. The instrumental, though, sounds straight up like a B-side track from The Weeknd's last album. And I feel like the track is trying to be a bit Michael Jackson's Thriller without being too obvious about it. But the track is interesting overall. The instrumental is rich with chirpy guitars and a funky bass line. That's true to the style, but it's just quite an oddball in context of the album. But I think Lizzo actually fits quite nicely into it, and it's another example of a direction that I think she would serve herself quite well doing more of. After that, we have Naked. This track is very melodramatic in a sense, but the end product ends up bordering filler territory. I think the impact of the track, I think, is just missing a little bit of something. The cathartic last chorus aims to really deliver the message of the track overall. Maybe it would have been better if there's a little bit more playfulness in the track. I'm not sure. The message that's trying to be delivered here is nice in theory. But like I said, it tries to be overly grandiose without delivering, unfortunately. And the next track, Birthday Girl. Like I said earlier, the album does this referencing of horoscopes, which I guess in theory isn't bad, but this track, just overall, the whole premise of it made it quite skippable. It isn't as strong as some of the other pop tracks on here, but it does kind of go back to the chirpy, peppy flavor that is present at the beginning of the album. But unfortunately, Lizzo sounds a little bit robotic on this chorus, which should be the strongest part of the track. The bridge features some cheesy spoken word commentary about people telling their birthday and their astrology sign, and it's awkwardly also sequenced on the album. It should not have been placed between Naked and If You Love Me. I'm not sure why that was a thing. But after that, If You Love Me, this track is another oddball in the context of the album. It's extremely adult alternative sounding. Like it could have easily passed in a 2000 soft rock radio rotation in some sort of doctor's office, playing all day. But it does sound dated. It sounds like from that era in the 2000s when like Goo Goo Dolls and like Cheryl Hill or maybe Faith Hill. I'm not sure who I'm thinking of, but yeah, the softer side of pop was very big, and you had tracks that sounded just like this. But I think it was executed decently. Her vocal performance is perhaps the best here on any part of the album. It's not a bad track. It's just I think it was done a bit generically, and there's not much distinguishing it. It seemed like it had a little bit of an identity crisis overall. And then at the end here, the album does end on a somewhat of a strong note. I will admit, when I first heard this song, Coldplay, I was very bugged by it because it's a sample from Yellow's Coldplay. The 90s, I guess, alternative anthem, if you will. And I was really confused about what was happening here. And this track overall is quite an outlier in terms of aesthetics. It's sort of like this refreshing, loungy, and breathy jazz pop cut with a playful piano structuring the instrumental throughout, with some nice usage of like strings to color the tracks as it progresses. In my opinion, which you would do quite well in an album that kind of keeps this vibe and aesthetic, especially like if there's like some sort of overarching concept in a project that Lizzo did in this. I think she sounds great in this sort of style. There's some lovely plucked bass filling much of the track, and I think it's one of the stronger tracks on this album, aside from me being slightly annoyed how it's so meta with referencing Coldplay, and she even name drops Coldplay in terms of like the lyrics. But I guess the track is interesting enough to kind of overlook that. Tracks like this do not save the album, in my opinion. There were just too many dips. It was like driving on a very poorly maintained road where just any second you're going to hit a pothole. It's not going to be smooth at all as you're going through the journey of this album or a listen through this album. And if anything, this is an improvement from 'Cause I Love You, but it's still frustrating in the sense that there were some highlights that I saw glimpses of greatness, perhaps, and like Lizzo's ability to fit in on certain pop styles. And when we get those glimpses of greatness, it really begs the question: why are we getting tracks like "Girls," "Break Up Twice," "Birthday Girl"? Um, when there's several other there's several other different ways or directions Lizzo could have went on this album that has perfect examples of like what else could have been done that would have made this a much stronger album. I think I know why there's tracks like "Girls" on here. I think it's very cheap viral bait for, I don't know, an app like TikTok, or maybe just a track that could maybe easily get onto a radio rotation so that it can chart higher on the Hot 100, and therefore making Lizzo a more, marketable brand and more well known. I'm not sure, but if I had to guess, I think there's cheap novelty tracks for cheap novelty reasons, in a sense. So it makes sense, but the potential of an artist as of Lizzo, in my opinion, remains a little untapped until maybe if she gets away from a major label, that, or perhaps she's able to have more creative freedom. I'm not sure. I'm not sure what the process is for the way she goes about making albums, but in my opinion, I was just left wanting a little bit more because I saw some flashes of really great stuff at some point. But yeah, that's what happens sometimes, I guess. And in terms of like rating this, I'm actually quite in the middle. I'm going to say a 5 out of 10. I was kind of more leaning towards maybe a lower score right when I first listened to it, but once I got some more listens under the belt, and I really took the time to hear certain different aspects of each song, I kind of saw like it kind of improved and grew on me. And when I compared it to "Cause I Love You," I kind of saw that it was just like, okay, well, there's some improvements done. So, who do I think this album's for? Perhaps any Lizzo fan. I know she has stans. They're probably really going to be into this. Casual pop listeners, depending on how they like their pop music. For instance, "About Damn Time's" already been a major hit. Stuff like that. That's going to resonate well, I think. Other than that, I'm not sure if like a modern R&B listener that really likes other artists, like for instance, let's say SZA, or like Kalani, or like Beyonce, I don't really think they're going to take Lizzo seriously in comparison to like projects artists such as them or like contemporaries have put out. I don't see that happening, in my opinion. And let's be serious here, and let's not give this the light of day as being a serious rap project. And I'll even say like this is nowhere on the level of even like an artist that I don't totally jive with all the time, like Cardi B, or even the new one on the block, Lotto, the Big D Energy Girl. I don't even think that her rapping is being pursued on the level of artists like those. And not to say Lizzo maybe doesn't have the potential, but I just don't see the effort put in my opinion. So yeah, this is kind of just a middle of the road thing, in my opinion. So I think I've said enough. Thanks for sticking out the whole entirety of the review with me. If you hear something after this going along the lines of Best and Worst Track of the Week, don't be appalled. You're still at the right place. I'm trying something new. But nonetheless, thanks for listening. Give a like and subscribe if you're on YouTube. Give some feedback, good or bad, in the comment section. I've been told things before that, I can take it. I'm still trying to say. But yeah, thanks for listening. Subscribe on your preferred listening service. The podcast has been doing well on the podcast side than the podcast has in its entire lifespan. So if I'm getting streams on the podcast side, that's cool. But nonetheless, yeah, I'll see y'all later, and take care of yourselves.